A Hell's Angel saw a ring he once gave on a little girl who changed his life. The morning sky was the color of old ash. Heavy clouds pressed down low over the highway, and the wind had a cold bite to it that cut straight through leather. Jake, Reaper Dawson, kept both hands steady on the handlebars of his Harley, the engine rumbling beneath him like a heartbeat. The road stretched out empty ahead. No cars, no noise. Just him and the gray morning, and the weight of something he hadn't carried in a very long time. He was going to a funeral. Not just any funeral. Sarah's funeral. He said her name inside his head, and it felt strange, like pressing on an old bruise. Tender in a way he hadn't expected. He hadn't spoken her name out loud in years. Maybe a decade. Maybe more. He had gotten good at burying things. That was what men like him did. You packed the hurt down deep, threw some dirt over it, and kept riding. But today, he was riding toward it, instead of away. He had been 18 the first time he saw her. She was standing outside the high school gym, laughing at something her friend said, her dark hair catching the afternoon sun. He remembered thinking she looked like someone who belonged in a painting, too bright for the ordinary world around her. He had been a skinny kid back then, before the leather and the tattoos and the years of hard living had thickened him up and hardened his face into something that made strangers cross the street. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. Back then, Sarah hadn't crossed the street. She had smiled at him. That smile had undone him completely. They were young and stupid, and wonderfully sure that love was enough to fix everything. He gave her a gold ring one evening, down by the creek behind her parents' house. Nothing fancy. He had saved up for 3 weeks to buy it. She slipped it onto her finger and held her hand up to catch the last light of the day. And she had looked so happy that Jake felt like the richest person alive. But nothing that good had ever stayed in his life for long. Her parents disapproved. His choices got worse. The roads he started traveling pulled him further from the boys she had cared about. One fight became two. Two became a silence that stretched into months, then years. He rode away one morning and told himself it was for her own good, that she deserved someone better, someone cleaner, someone who wasn't already halfway gone. He had believed that for 27 years. The funeral home was a small brick building, set back from the road, behind a row of oak trees. Their leaves had turned orange and rust and were just beginning to let go, drifting down slow across the parking lot. Jake pulled in and cut the engine. He sat there a moment, not moving. A few people glanced over from the entrance. He saw their eyes go to his leather vest, to the patches, to the silver skull ring on his right hand. He was used to those looks. They didn't bother him anymore. He went inside and stood near the back. The service was quiet and simple. A pastor spoke about grace and peace, and a life lived with gentleness. A few people cried softly. Jake stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, staring at the closed casket covered in white flowers, and he kept his grief locked behind his eyes where nobody could see it. When it was over, people moved slowly toward the door. Jake turned to go. That was when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old. She stood near one of the chairs, hugging a stuffed rabbit tightly to her chest. Her dark, curly hair fell around a small, serious face. She was watching the adults around her with wide brown eyes that were too calm, too patient for someone her age. And around her neck, on a thin gold chain, hung a ring. His ring. Jake stopped breathing. He would have known that ring anywhere. The small engraved leaf pattern along the band. The way the yellow gold caught even the dim indoor light. He had held that ring in his palm for 3 weeks, before giving it away. His feet carried him forward before his mind gave permission. The little girl didn't run. Most kids her age would have backed away from a man like Jake. He was big, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with a thick, dark beard going gray at the edges, and arms covered in faded tattoos. His leather vest had patches on it that had made grown men nervous. His face, as more than one person had told him over the years, was not a friendly face. But this little girl just looked up at him with those wide brown eyes and waited. Jake crouched down slowly, so he wasn't towering over her. His knees popped when he did it, which he ignored. He rested his forearms on his thighs and looked at her. Up close, she had her mother's face, the same soft jaw, the same way of holding still that made her seem older than she was. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Hey," the little girl said back. "That's a nice rabbit you got there." She looked down at the stuffed animal in her arms, like she was considering it carefully. The rabbit was well loved. One of its button eyes was slightly loose, and its fur had been rubbed thin in places from being held so much. "His name is Benny," she said. "Good name." She studied Jake's face the way kids do, without any embarrassment about it, like she was reading something written there. Then she said, "You look sad." Jake blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess I am." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she shifted Benny to one arm and stuck out her small hand toward him. "I'm Lily." He took her hand in his. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger, and he shook it gently. "I'm Jake," he said. "Mr. Jake," she decided, like she was assigning him the name on the spot. He almost smiled. Almost. His eyes moved to the ring hanging around her neck. The gold caught the light again, and something deep in his chest pulled tight. He wanted to ask about it. The question was right there, sitting on the front of his tongue. But Lily was 4 years old and had just attended her mother's funeral, and Jake Dawson had never been a man who bulldozed through tender things. So he let it sit. He stood back up and looked around the room. The crowd had thinned out. A few people still lingered near the door, speaking quietly. An older woman in a gray blouse was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Nobody seemed to be watching Lily. Nobody was moving toward her with that quiet urgency that said she belonged to them. A man in a dark suit appeared at Jake's elbow. He was somewhere around 60, soft-spoken, with the careful manner of someone who dealt with grief every day. The funeral director. "Did you know Sarah well?" the man asked. "A long time ago," Jake said. The director nodded slowly. His eyes moved to Lily, and something shifted in his expression. Something careful and sad. "Poor little thing," he said, low enough that only Jake could hear. Jake looked at him. "Where's her family?" The director was quiet for a moment. He folded his hands in front of him and chose his words the way a man does when the truth is heavy. "There isn't much family to speak of," he said. "Sarah's mother is estranged. Has been for years. A few distant relatives were contacted, but—" He paused. "None of them are in a position to take her, or willing." Jake said nothing. He just looked at Lily, who had sat down in one of the chairs and was quietly fixing Benny's loose eye with careful little fingers, completely absorbed in the task. "Social services will be involved," the director added. "They're already aware." Jake nodded once. He looked at the ring around her neck one more time. Then he looked away, toward the door, toward the parking lot, toward the road that would take him back to his life. He walked outside into the cold morning air and stood beside his bike for a long moment, his hand resting on the handlebar. He couldn't shake it. Any of it. The clubhouse was loud that night. It usually was. Someone had the jukebox going, an old country song with a steel guitar that bounced off the concrete walls. A few guys were shooting pool in the back. Big Mike sat at the head of the long table with a beer in his hand, laughing at something Decker had said. The smell of grilled food drifted in from the back patio where Haas was cooking. Jake sat at the far end of the bar and didn't say a word. He had a beer in front of him. He hadn't touched it. He just stared at the worn wood of the bar top, like it had something written on it that only he could read. Decker noticed first. Decker always noticed things. He was a lean, sharp-eyed man in his late 30s who didn't miss much. He wandered over and leaned against the bar beside Jake, glancing at the untouched beer. "You gonna drink that, or just stare at it?" Decker asked. "Don't start," Jake said. Decker held up both hands and backed off. But he didn't go far. He pulled up a stool and sat down, picking at the label on his own bottle. A few minutes passed. "You went to that funeral today," Decker said. It wasn't a question. Word got around fast in a club. Jake didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Yeah." "You good?" Jake picked up his beer and took one slow drink. He set it back down. "I'm fine." Decker looked at him for a long moment and clearly did not believe that. But he was smart enough not to push. It was Big Mike who eventually came over. He moved the way he always did, like a man who took up space on purpose and wasn't sorry about it. He was 58, built like a refrigerator, with a gray beard that fell to his chest and a president's patch on his vest that he had earned the hard way. He dropped onto the stool on the other side of Jake and signaled to the bartender for 2 fresh beers. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, which was something Big Mike was actually good at when he needed to be. Then he said, "Talk." Jake exhaled slowly through his nose. He turned the beer bottle in his hands. "You remember me talking about Sarah?" he said. "Back when we were starting the chapter. Years ago." "The girl from before," Mike said, not unkindly. "She died," Jake said. "Cancer." Mike was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, brother." Jake nodded. He stared straight ahead. The jukebox switched to something slower. "She had a little girl," Jake said. 4 years old. He paused. "No one to take her." Big Mike looked at him then. Really looked at him. He had known Jake for over 20 years and he could read the man better than most. What he saw on Jake's face right now was not simple grief. It was something more tangled up than that. "The ring I gave her," Jake said quietly. "She had it on a chain around the little girl's neck." Mike said nothing. He picked up his fresh beer and took a long drink and kept his eyes on the wall in front of them. "I don't know what that means," Jake said. "I don't know why she'd do that." "Maybe she wanted you to find it," Mike said. Jake didn't answer that. The rest of the evening moved around him like water around a rock. The laughter, and the pool game, and the smell of food, all of it. Jake stayed where he was, quiet and still, until the night had worn itself down to just a few guys left at the tables. He was pulling on his jacket to leave when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it. He didn't. The number was unfamiliar. He answered anyway. "Is this Jacob Dawson?" A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Yeah," he said. "Mr. Dawson, my name is Amanda Reynolds. I'm a social worker with the county." A brief pause. "I'm calling about a little girl named Lily Carter. Sarah Carter listed your name as an emergency contact in her personal paperwork." Another pause, shorter this time. "I was hoping you'd be willing to meet with me tomorrow morning." The county building smelled like old coffee and copy paper. Jake sat in a plastic chair outside a small office, his helmet resting on his knee. He felt too big for the chair. He felt too big for the whole building, honestly. A woman at the front desk had glanced up at him when he walked in, and then, very quickly, looked back down at her computer screen. He was used to that. A door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was maybe mid-30s, with brown hair pulled back neat, and a calm, steady way about her. She wore a gray blazer and carried a manila folder tucked under one arm. She looked at Jake the same way she probably looked at everyone. Directly, without flinching. "Mr. Dawson," she said, and extended her hand. "Amanda Reynolds, thank you for coming." He shook it. "Jake is fine." She nodded and gestured toward her office. He followed her in and folded himself into another chair that was slightly better than the one outside. She sat across from him and opened the folder. "I'll be straightforward with you," she said. "I don't have a lot of good options right now when it comes to Lily." Jake said nothing. He waited. "Sarah had a small number of distant relatives we were able to contact," Amanda continued. "2 cousins and an aunt. All 3 declined." She said it plainly, without judgment. But something in her expression told Jake it wasn't the first time she'd had to deliver that kind of news. "We also reached out to a few family friends. Nothing came through." "What about foster care?" Jake asked. "That's the most likely path at this point," she said. "But I want to be honest with you about what that looks like. Our local placements are stretched right now. Lily would most likely be placed out of the area temporarily, possibly more than once, while we work toward a permanent solution." Jake looked at his hands. "She's 4. "Yes," Amanda said quietly. "She is." The room was very still for a moment. Amanda set the folder down and leaned forward slightly. "Sarah listed your name in her personal emergency paperwork. She filled it out about 3 years ago. She was very deliberate about it." She paused. "She wrote that you were someone she trusted completely." Jake felt something move through him that he didn't have a name for. "I'm a biker," he said. His voice was flat. "I live in a clubhouse." "I'm aware of what your lifestyle looks like from the outside," Amanda said, and she didn't soften it or dress it up. "And I won't pretend there isn't a process here. If you were to take temporary placement, there would be a home evaluation. There would be check-ins. Regular ones." She looked at him evenly. "But Sarah knew all of that when she wrote your name down. She wrote it anyway." Jake stood up. He walked to the small window and looked out at the parking lot. A pigeon was sitting on top of a light pole doing absolutely nothing. He thought about Lily's face at the funeral, the way she had held that stuffed rabbit against her chest, the ring on the chain around her neck. He thought about Sarah writing his name down 3 years ago, knowing what he was, and doing it anyway. "Can I see her?" he asked. Amanda led him down a hallway and through another door into a small waiting room with toys in one corner and crayon drawings taped to the wall. A woman sat in the corner reading something on her phone. And there, sitting cross-legged on a little rug in the middle of the floor, was Lily. She was arranging a small pile of plastic animals into a circle. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked beside her knee. She was talking to the animals very softly, giving each one instructions about something. She looked so small. She looked so completely alone. Jake stood in the doorway for a long moment. Something in his chest pulled tight and did not let go. He turned back to Amanda. "Just temporary," he said, "until you find something permanent." "Understood," she said. He looked back at Lily one more time. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." Jake's house was not built for a 4-year-old. That became clear about 30 seconds after they walked through the front door. It was a small place on the edge of town. A single story, with a covered porch and a gravel driveway. Inside, it was clean enough but bare. A couch. A coffee table with a ring stain on one corner. A bookshelf with more tools on it than books. A kitchen where the only things on the counter were a coffee maker and a socket wrench he kept meaning to put away. Lily stood just inside the doorway and looked around. She still had her rabbit tucked under one arm. She was wearing a yellow jacket with a hood shaped like a duck. One of the social worker's helpers had packed a small bag for her, and Jake carried it in one hand. It was a pink bag with a cartoon elephant on the front. It felt very strange in his grip. "This is it," Jake said. Lily looked up at him. "Where's my room?" He had not thought about that. Not specifically. There was a spare room down the hall that had a weight bench in it and a few cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. "Working on it," he said. She accepted that without complaint. He moved the weight bench into the garage in about 4 minutes. The boxes he stacked in his own room. He found a sleeping bag in the closet and laid it out on the floor with 2 spare pillows. He stood back, and looked at it. It was not great. Lily stood in the doorway of the room and studied the situation. Then she walked in, set her rabbit on one of the pillows, and sat down on the sleeping bag like it was the most normal thing in the world. "It's okay," she said. He did not know why that made him feel worse. Dinner was its own challenge. He opened the refrigerator and stared into it for a long moment. He had leftover chili from 2 days ago, half a block of cheese, a six-pack, and some condiments that had been there long enough that he didn't want to think about it too hard. "You like chili?" he asked. Lily appeared at his elbow. She looked into the fridge with great seriousness. "What's chili?" she asked. He ended up driving them both to the grocery store. He pushed the cart and Lily walked beside it, stopping every few feet to look at something on the shelves. She spent a full 2 minutes studying a display of paper towels like they held some great mystery. He bought 6 boxes of cereal because he genuinely did not know which kind she liked, and asking her had not helped because she pointed at all of them. He also bought bread and peanut butter and apple juice and some pasta and a small container of goldfish crackers, which she asked for 3 times and which cost $1.29. Dinner ended up being peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles. Lily ate hers in careful, precise bites. She fed small, invisible bites to her rabbit between each of her own. After dinner, she wanted a bath. He ran the water, and she handled the rest herself with great independence, informing him that she was very good at baths. He sat outside the bathroom door the whole time anyway. Then, she wanted a story. He did not own a single children's book. He found one on his phone and read it aloud, sitting on the floor beside the sleeping bag, his back against the wall, his voice sounding strange and stiff, around words like bunny and meadow. She was asleep before he finished. He carried her rabbit over and tucked it gently under her arm. Then he walked out to the porch and sat down on the steps. The night air was cool and sharp. He rested his forearms on his knees and stared out at the dark gravel driveway. Behind him, through the thin wall, Lily's small voice rose up soft and sleepy. "Good night, Mr. Jake." He sat very still. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there on those steps, alone with the dark and the quiet, wondering how one tiny girl could make a house feel so completely different in the span of a single evening. Jake was up before the sun. That part was normal. He had always been an early riser. Coffee by 5, quiet by choice. He liked the stillness of early morning, the way the world hadn't started making noise yet. What was not normal was the small voice that came from down the hall at 6:15. "Mr. Jake?" He set down his coffee mug. "Mr. Jake, I'm awake." He walked down the hall and pushed open the door. Lily was sitting up on the sleeping bag with her rabbit in her lap. Her hair was sticking out in about 4 different directions. She looked at him with wide, serious eyes. "I'm hungry," she said. "Okay," he said. "Let's eat." This was the moment he discovered a problem. 6 boxes of cereal sat on the counter. He had bought them the night before, because he hadn't known which one she liked. Now, they were all lined up in a row, and he still didn't know. "Pick one," he said. Lily studied the boxes with the same focused expression she had used on the paper towels at the grocery store. She took her time. She pointed at the one with a cartoon bird on the front. "Progress." He poured it into a bowl. Then he opened the fridge for milk and found the carton he had bought was nearly empty, barely enough for a few spoonfuls. He had forgotten that he'd used most of it in his coffee over the past 3 days. Lily looked at the cereal, then at him. "There's no milk," she said. "I can see that," he said. She ate the cereal dry. She seemed unbothered by this. Jake stood at the counter drinking his coffee and feeling like he had somehow already failed at the morning before it had really started. After breakfast, he drove them back to the grocery store. This was their second visit in less than 12 hours. The same cashier was working the front register. She smiled when she saw Lily and gave him a look that was either sympathy or amusement? Possibly both. He bought milk. He also bought more juice, a box of crackers, some fruit, and a thing of yogurt, because Lily grabbed it off the shelf and held it with both hands, and he didn't have the heart to put it back. Back at the house, he tried to do a load of her laundry. He figured that was a useful thing to do. He was good at laundry. He had done his own laundry for decades without incident. Lily's things were a different matter. He missed the tag on her small sweater that said cold water only. He used warm. When the cycle finished, the sweater had shrunk down to a size that might fit a doll. He held it up and stared at it. Lily looked at it from across the room. "That's too small now," she said helpfully. "Yeah," he said. He set it on the counter as evidence of his failure and made a mental note to replace it. The afternoon moved more gently. Lily found a box of crayons in her pink bag and settled herself at his kitchen table. She was quiet for a long time. Just drawing. Her tongue poked out slightly at the corner of her mouth when she was concentrating. Jake cleaned up the kitchen around her. He fixed the running faucet on the bathroom sink, something he'd been putting off for 2 weeks. He came back and refilled her apple juice without her asking. She held up her paper. "I made this for you," she said. He took it from her and looked at it. 2 figures stood side by side. One was small, with yellow hair and a big round smile. The other was tall and dark, with what appeared to be a very serious expression, and a lot of lines on its arms that he guessed were meant to be tattoos. Underneath, in large, careful letters that leaned a little to the left, she had written, "Me and Mr. Jake." He looked at it for a long moment. Then, Lily climbed off her chair, walked to the refrigerator, and pressed it flat against the door. She stood on her toes to smooth out the corners. Jake watched her do it, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he smiled. A real one, small and quiet. The kind that comes before a person even realizes it's happening. The address was written on a small piece of paper the social worker had given him. A street on the east side of town, a neighborhood Jake didn't know well. He drove slow. Lily sat in the back seat with her rabbit on her lap. She was quiet in a way that felt different from her usual quiet, smaller somehow. When they pulled up to the building, Lily looked out the window. "That's my home," she said softly. Jake turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, but didn't move right away. Then she unbuckled herself and climbed out, clutching her rabbit tight against her chest. The building was old, but clean. 3 floors. Pale yellow walls in the stairwell. The property manager, a short woman named Mrs. Delgado, met them at the door on the 2nd floor. She had kind eyes, and she crouched down when she saw Lily. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. Lily gave a small wave. Mrs. Delgado handed Jake the key and told him to take all the time he needed. She disappeared back down the stairs without another word. Jake unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was small and tidy. A yellow couch, a bookshelf along the wall packed full, drawings taped everywhere. The same kind of crooked, colorful drawings that were now on his refrigerator at home. A little dining table with 2 chairs. Everything clean. Everything carefully arranged. It smelled like something faint and soft. He couldn't name it, but it felt like Sarah. Lily walked straight to her bedroom. Jake followed slowly, looking at the room around him. There were pictures on the bookshelf. Sarah at different ages. Lily as a baby, then a toddler. A small framed photo near the window caught his eye. He picked it up. Sarah was maybe 30 in the photo. She was smiling, standing in front of a row of motorcycles at what looked like an outdoor event. He recognized the banner in the background, a veterans fundraiser his club had organized 6 years ago. He set the photo down carefully. He spent the next hour packing. Mrs. Delgado had left some boxes by the door. He worked quietly, folding Lily's clothes, wrapping her small belongings in newspaper. Lily moved around the apartment slowly, picking things up and putting them into a box she had claimed as her own. Her stuffed animals, a little music box, a book with a worn cover that she held for a long time before placing it gently on top of everything else. Once, he heard her stop in the hallway. He looked over and she was standing in the doorway of Sarah's bedroom, just standing there, not going in, not saying anything. He walked over and stood beside her. She reached up and took his hand. He held it. Neither of them said a word. By the time they got back to his house, it was late afternoon. Lily was worn out. She barely made it through dinner. He carried her to the sleeping bag and tucked the blanket around her. She curled onto her side with her rabbit and was asleep in minutes. Jake sat at the kitchen table. The boxes from the apartment were stacked near the front door. He hadn't gone through Sarah's things yet. Most of it was Lily's stuff, but there was one small box he had packed himself: letters, documents, things that looked important. He pulled it close and went through it slowly. Near the bottom, beneath a folded stack of papers, he found a sealed envelope. His name was written on the front. Just his name, in Sarah's handwriting. Letters he recognized from notes she had passed him in the school hallways 20 years ago. Jake. He sat very still for a moment. Then he opened it. The letter was 2 pages, written by hand. His eyes moved through the first few lines and then stopped. He read them again. Lily was not his daughter. He set the letter down on the table. His chest felt like something heavy had been placed on it. He pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the wall. Then he picked it up and kept reading. Sarah's words were gentle and honest. She hadn't written it to hurt him. That was clear. Every sentence was careful. Every word chosen with love. Near the end of the second page, one paragraph stopped him completely. If anything ever happens to me, please watch over Lily. You're the only man I've ever trusted completely. Not because of who you were when we were young, but because of who you became. She doesn't need a perfect person. She needs someone who shows up. And Jake, you have always shown up. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet. Down the hall, Lily slept without knowing any of this. Without knowing what her mother had written. Without knowing that the man sitting at the table with wet eyes and shaking hands had just had his whole understanding of things rearranged in 2 pages. He folded the letter carefully, held it in both hands, and sat there in the quiet for a long, long while. Jake didn't sleep much. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the letter folded on the nightstand beside him. He had read it 3 times, maybe 4. Each time the same line found him. You have always shown up. He didn't feel like a man who showed up. He felt like a man who had spent most of his life riding away from things, from people, from anything that got too close. But Sarah had believed something different about him. She had watched from a distance for years and still believed it. He wasn't sure he deserved that. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying there in the quiet, he made a decision. Not a loud decision. Not the kind a man announces. Just a quiet, firm thing that settled in his chest like a stone finding the bottom of a river. He was going to show up. By the time pale gray light came through the window, Jake was already in the kitchen. He had found a bag of oats in the cabinet the day before. He wasn't sure how to make them exactly, but he had watched a woman at the grocery store check the back of the container, so he flipped it over and read the instructions twice. Then he filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. He heard small feet padding down the hallway. Lily appeared in the doorway, hair loose and messy, rabbit dragging along the floor behind her. She looked at the stove, then at him. "What are you making?" she asked. "Oatmeal." She scrunched her nose. "Does it taste good?" "Probably not," he said honestly. "But it's hot." She climbed up onto one of the kitchen chairs and set her rabbit on the table. She watched him stir. "Mommy put honey in it," she said. Jake opened the cabinet. Toward the back, behind a jar of peanut butter, was a small bottle of honey. He held it up. Lily smiled. "That's the one." He stirred in the honey. When it was done, he set a bowl in front of her, and one across from her for himself. She picked up her spoon and took a careful bite. "It's okay," she said, which Jake figured was about as good as it was going to get. He sat down and ate with her. It was a small thing. Just two people eating oatmeal at a kitchen table on a Thursday morning. But it felt like something. Like a routine just beginning to take shape. Fragile and new. The way the first thread of a rope hasn't become strong yet, but is at least there. After breakfast, Jake let Lily pick what to watch on television, while he cleaned up the dishes. She chose a cartoon about a small bear that solved problems by asking questions. It was not the kind of thing Jake would ever choose to watch. But he could hear her laughing from the kitchen, little bright bursts of sound, and he didn't mind it at all. He dried the last bowl and walked to the doorway. She was curled on the couch with her rabbit, feet tucked under her, completely absorbed. He sat down on the other end. She didn't say anything, didn't look over. She just shifted slightly and leaned a little in his direction, the way small children do without thinking about it, pulled toward warmth, the way a plant finds light. He watched maybe 10 minutes of the cartoon. He didn't follow the story, but he stayed. After a while, her leaning turned into resting. Her head dropped sideways until it found his arm. Then she was still. He looked down at her. She was asleep. Lips parted, one hand curled under her chin. Her rabbit pressed against her. The little ring on its chain had slipped to the side and caught the morning light coming through the window. Jake didn't move. He sat very still so he wouldn't wake her. And sitting there with her weight against his arm, something shifted quietly inside him. Not loud, not sudden, just real. He was beginning to care about this little girl. The clubhouse sat at the edge of town on a flat stretch of land behind a chain-link fence. It was a wide, low building with a gravel lot out front, and motorcycles parked in a long row along the side. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Iron Road MC," in faded black letters. Jake pulled his truck into the lot and cut the engine. He had tried to arrange for someone to watch Lily that morning. Grace from the church had offered before, but she had a doctor's appointment. The social worker was unavailable. He had called 2 different numbers and gotten voicemail both times. So, here they were. He looked over at Lily. She was sitting up straight in her booster seat, craning her neck to look at the row of motorcycles through the window. Her rabbit was tucked under her arm. "Whose bikes are those?" she asked. "My friends." "All of them?" "Yeah." She pressed her nose against the glass. "That's a lot of friends." Jake got out and came around to her side. He unbuckled her and lifted her down to the gravel. She immediately reached up and took his hand without being asked. He looked down at her small fingers, wrapped around 2 of his. Her nails were painted pink. He had done that himself 2 nights ago, badly, with a tiny bottle of polish he found in the bag of her things. It looked like a 4-year-old had done it, which, to be fair, it sort of had. He pushed open the door. The clubhouse was loud and warm inside. Someone had music going in the back. The smell of coffee and motor oil hung in the air. 3 men sat at a long table near the window. 2 more leaned over a motorcycle engine on a workbench along the wall. Big Mike was the first one to look up. He was a big man, 58 years old, with a gray beard that reached his chest and arms like tree trunks. He had been president of Iron Road for 15 years. He had seen most things. But the sight of Jake Dawson walking through the door, holding the hand of a tiny 4-year-old girl in pink overalls, made him go completely still. The room followed his eyes. One by one, the noise dropped away. Lily looked around the room at all the large, leather-vested, tattooed men staring at her. She did not look scared. She tilted her head slightly, the way a curious bird does when it hears a new sound. "Hi," she said to the room. Nobody said anything for a full second. Then Tiny, A 300-pound man with a shaved head and a snake tattoo that ran up his neck cleared his throat. "Hi," he said back. His voice came out much softer than usual. "I'm Lily," she said. "I brought Gerald." She held up the rabbit. Big Mike blinked. He looked at Jake. Jake gave him a look that said he would explain later and pulled out a chair at the far end of the table. "You sit here," Jake said to Lily. "I'll be right over there." She climbed up into the chair, settled Gerald on the table in front of her, and looked around the room with calm, interested eyes. Jake moved to the other end of the table where Big Mike was already leaning in close. "You brought a child to the clubhouse," Mike said quietly. "I didn't have options today." Mike looked down at Lily, who had apparently decided to introduce Gerald to Hector, a broad-shouldered man with burned scars on his forearms, who now looked completely unsure what to do with his hands. "Gerald likes motorcycles," Lily was telling Hector seriously. "He told me on the way here." Hector looked at the stuffed rabbit, then at Lily, then across the room at Jake, as if asking for help. Jake offered nothing. Hector looked back at Lily. "Yeah?" he said carefully. "Yeah," she said. "He wants to see one up close. Can he?" And just like that, Hector, who had never in his life been soft about anything, pushed his chair back and said, "Come on then. I'll show him the best one." Jake pulled the truck into the parking lot of May's Diner just after 9 in the morning. It was a small place with a green awning and a neon sign in the window that had been flickering for what looked like years. 2 older men sat at the counter inside. A bell above the door chimed when they walked in. Lily had her rabbit tucked under her arm. She walked beside Jake, with her small sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. She looked around the diner the way she looked at most places, like it was worth paying attention to. They slid into a booth near the window. The vinyl seat was cracked down the middle and patched with a strip of silver tape. Jake picked up a laminated menu that was sticky at the edges. He already knew what he wanted. He always got the same thing here. 2 eggs, toast, black coffee. He glanced over the top of the menu at Lily. She was not looking at her menu. She was watching a woman across the diner. The woman was old, maybe in her 70s. She had white hair pinned up under a small paper cap and a yellow uniform that had been washed so many times it had gone pale. Her name tag said, Mabel. She moved between the tables slowly, carrying a coffee pot in one hand and a damp cloth in the other. Her face was tight. Not mean, just tired. The kind of tired that had been building up for a long time. As Jake watched, Mabel reached for a stack of plates on the counter. Her hand slipped. 2 plates crashed to the floor and shattered. The sound cut through the diner. The 2 men at the counter looked over. Mabel stood very still for a moment, her eyes closed. Then she bent down, slowly, with stiff knees, and started picking up the broken pieces. Nobody moved to help her. Jake started to slide out of the booth, but Lily was already gone. She had climbed down from her seat without a word and crossed the diner in her squeaky sneakers. She crouched down next to Mabel on the floor and started carefully picking up the larger broken pieces with her small fingers. "Careful," Jake said sharply, halfway out of his seat. Lily looked up at him. "I'm being careful, Mr. Jake." Mabel had gone still. She was looking at Lily the way people look at something they don't quite believe. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart," Mabel said. Her voice was rough around the edges. "I know," Lily said simply. She kept picking up pieces. Jake made his way over and crouched down on Mabel's other side. He collected the remaining shards quickly and dropped them into the small trash bin Mabel had brought over. When it was done, Mabel stood up slowly, one hand on her knee. Jake stood too. "Thank you," Mabel said. She looked at Jake briefly, then back down at Lily. Lily looked up at her. "Are you having a bad day?" Mabel let out a small breath. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sigh. Something in between. "Little bit, yeah." Lily nodded, like that made complete sense. Gerald has bad days too sometimes. She held up the rabbit. I tell him that bad days don't last forever. Only good days do. Mabel stared at her. Something shifted in the old woman's face. The tightness around her eyes eased just slightly. Who taught you that? My mommy, Lily said. A short silence settled between them. Mabel reached out and gently touched the top of Lily's head. Just once. A small, quiet gesture. Then she straightened up, tucked the cloth back into her apron, and picked up her coffee pot. Jake guided Lily back to their booth. He settled into the cracked vinyl seat and watched Mabel move toward the counter. The old woman's shoulders were not quite as stiff as before. She refilled one of the men's cups and exchanged a few quiet words with him. Small things, but her face had changed. Jake looked across the table at Lily, who was arranging Gerald against the napkin dispenser. He had lived 45 years on this earth. He had been in situations that would make most men's hair go white. And somehow, this little girl, not even tall enough to reach the counter, had just done something he hadn't thought to do. She had simply shown up. The days found their shape quietly. It happened the way most things happen. Not all at once, but little by little, until Jake looked up one morning and realized they had a routine. Mornings started early. Lily woke up before 7 every single day, without fail. Jake heard her small feet on the floor before his alarm went off. By the time he pulled himself out of bed and into the hallway, she was already in the kitchen, standing on her step stool in front of the counter, waiting patiently beside the toaster. "Cinnamon today?" she would ask. "Cinnamon today," he would answer. He bought the bread she liked, the thick kind with the soft crust. He kept the cinnamon sugar in a small jar next to the toaster because she liked to shake it herself. She was very serious about how much she used. Not too much, not too little. She would tilt her head and study the toast like she was making an important decision. It made Jake smile every single time, even when he tried not to. After breakfast came the school preparation. Lily attended a small preschool 3 mornings a week. Jake had learned quickly that getting a 4-year-old ready was its own kind of project. Shoes had to be on the right feet. Hair had to be brushed. Gerald the rabbit had to be settled safely on the couch before they left, because Lily did not take him to school, but she needed to know he was comfortable before she could go. "He gets lonely," she explained once. Jake had nodded seriously. Understood. He started setting Gerald against the couch cushion each morning without being asked. Errands happened in the afternoons on days she was home. Lily came with him everywhere. The hardware store, the grocery store, the gas station where old Pete worked the register, and always slipped her a piece of wrapped candy from the jar beside the register. She remembered Pete's name after the first visit and greeted him by it every time after that. Pete started smiling when they came through the door. Jake noticed things like that. The way she remembered names. The way she looked at people directly when they talked to her, like whatever they were saying was the most important thing in the world. Evenings were the quietest part of the day. After dinner, after her bath, after her teeth were brushed and she was in her pajamas, Lily would climb up onto the small couch and pull the blanket over her lap. Jake would sit at the other end. They watched cartoons mostly. Sometimes she asked him to read to her from one of the books the social worker had sent over in a box with her things. And then came bedtime. Every night, without exception, Lily said goodnight to Jake, to Gerald, and to the crayon drawing she had taped to the wall beside her bed. The drawing had grown. She added to it almost daily. What started as 2 stick figures had become a whole picture with a house and a sun, and something Jake suspected was supposed to be his motorcycle. One evening, after he had tucked her in and turned the lamp down low, Lily looked up at him from her pillow. "Mr. Jake," she said, "did you know my mommy when she was little?" Jake was quiet for a moment. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Not when she was little," he said. "I knew her when we were both almost grown up. Teenagers." Lily thought about that. Was she nice then too? Yeah, Jake said. His voice came out softer than he expected. She was the nicest person I ever met. We used to ride bikes together. Not motorcycles. Regular bikes with handlebar streamers. He paused. She always let me pick the direction we went. But she always knew which way was home. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like Mommy." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "It really does." He sat there a little longer in the low light, listening to her breathing slow down. The preschool was a small yellow building on Maple Street, with hand-painted butterflies on the front window, and a wooden sign out front that read, "Little Learners Academy," in cheerful blue letters. A bulletin board near the entrance was covered in colorful paper flowers, each one with a child's name written in the center. Lily's flower was pink. She had made it herself. Jake stood outside the entrance on Tuesday morning, hands in his jacket pockets. He had come for the weekly Good Morning gathering, which the teacher, Miss Holly, described in the newsletter as a short event where parents joined their children for songs and sharing time. Lily had asked him 3 times if he was coming. He had said yes, all 3 times. So here he was. He pulled open the door and stepped inside. The hallway smelled like crayons and apple juice. Bright artwork covered every inch of the walls. Parent voices buzzed from the main classroom at the end of the hall. Jake walked toward it. The room went noticeably quieter when he stepped through the doorway. It was not all at once. It was the kind of quiet that travels. One parent glanced over and nudged another. A woman near the craft table turned and looked at him fully, her eyes dropping to his vest, to the patches on his chest, to the worn leather and the boots. A man standing by the window crossed his arms slowly. Jake was used to being looked at. He had been looked at his whole life. But this felt different. These were not strangers on the road. These were people who had children in the same room as Lily. People who packed lunches and helped with craft projects and signed permission slips. And the way they looked at him made it very clear he was not what they had expected to walk through that door. Lily found him before he had taken 3 steps into the room. "Mr. Jake!" She came running across the carpet in her purple sneakers, arms out. She grabbed his hand with both of hers and pulled. "Come see my cubby. I put a sticker on it. A dinosaur one." "Let's see it," he said. He let her lead him. He did not look at the other parents again. Miss Holly greeted him warmly. She was a young woman with red hair and kind eyes, and she did not seem bothered by his appearance at all. She shook his hand and told him Lily talked about him often. "Good things, I hope," Jake said. "The very best things," she said, and she meant it. The gathering lasted about 20 minutes. The children sat in a circle on a rainbow rug and sang 2 songs. Lily sat straight and sang every word loudly and off-key with complete confidence. Jake stood near the back with the other parents. He clapped when the kids clapped. He did not sing. Afterward, there was juice and small cookies on a table near the window. The children scattered toward their parents. Jake got a cup of juice he did not want and stood near the wall. 2 women stood close by, not quite facing him. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "I just think it's unusual," one of them said. "A man like that." "Someone should have said something to the school," the other replied. "I'm not saying anything against the little girl. She seems sweet enough. But a biker? That whole club? You know what kind of people they are. It's no kind of environment for a child." Jake stared at the cookies on the table. His jaw tightened. He kept his face still. He had learned a long time ago how to keep his face still. Lily came running back to him a moment later with a drawing she had done earlier in the week. She had saved it for him. It was a picture of 2 people on a motorcycle under a yellow sun. "That's us," she said proudly, pointing to the smaller figure. "I see that," he said quietly. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. But later that night, after Lily was asleep and the house was silent, he sat on the back porch steps and stared out at nothing in particular. Maybe those women were right. Maybe a little girl deserved better than this. The next morning was cool and bright. The kind of morning where the sky is so blue, it almost doesn't look real. Jake walked beside Lily on the sidewalk downtown. They had stopped at the bakery on 5th Street, where Lily had carefully chosen a blueberry muffin and then changed her mind twice before settling on the same blueberry muffin she had pointed to first. Jake had bought her the muffin and a small orange juice with a straw and said nothing about the changing her mind part. They were heading back toward where he had parked the truck when Lily stopped walking. "Mr. Jake." "Keep walking, Lilybug." "But Mr. Jake, look." He looked. Across the street, near the corner of 5th and Birch, a man sat on a bench. He was older, maybe late 60s, with white hair cropped close to his head, and a jacket with an American flag patch on the sleeve. A pair of crutches leaned against the bench beside him. One of his pant legs was folded and pinned just below the knee. The man was struggling with a large paper bag of groceries that had split along the bottom. Cans were rolling across the sidewalk. He was reaching for them, but every time he leaned forward, his balance shifted wrong, and he had to catch himself. Two people walked past him. Neither one stopped. Lily was already pulling on Jake's hand. "He needs help," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was very certain. "I see that. We have to help him." Jake watched the man pick up one can and nearly drop his crutch. The man's face was tight with effort and something else. Something that looked like embarrassment. Like he hated that this was happening in front of people. Jake understood that feeling. "Come on," he said. He crossed the street with Lily's hand in his. He crouched down near the rolling cans and started gathering them without saying anything first. He just picked them up. One, then another. He found a green bean can that had rolled all the way to the curb. The man looked at him. His eyes were sharp and careful. "I don't need charity," the man said. "Bag split," Jake said simply. "Happens." He stood up with the cans gathered against his chest and looked at the ruined bag. The bottom was gone completely. "You parked close?" Jake asked. The man studied him for a moment, studied the leather vest, the patches, the size of him. Then he looked down at Lily, who was holding her muffin in one hand and watching the man with big, soft eyes. "2 blocks," the man said finally. Jake nodded. He took out his phone and called Des, one of the club members who had been meeting him nearby that morning to help haul some donated equipment for a veteran fundraiser. The club ran every fall. "Bring the truck around to 5th and Birch," he said, "and grab a box from the back if there's one." Des arrived in 4 minutes. He pulled up, climbed out, and without being told anything, he took one look at the situation and opened the tailgate. He found a cardboard box and held it steady while Jake loaded the cans into it. 2 more club members, Tank and Ricky, were with Des. They helped carry the box the 2 blocks to the man's building and up 1 flight of stairs to his apartment door. Not one of them made a big deal out of it. The man stood in his doorway afterward. His expression had softened from what it was before. He looked at Jake directly. "Frank Miller," he said and extended his hand. Jake shook it. "Jake!" Frank looked at the 3 big men standing in his narrow hallway with a cardboard box of groceries and a 4-year-old girl holding a half-eaten blueberry muffin. "I was Army," Frank said. 22 years. "My club does a veteran ride every November," Jake said. "You should come out." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Maybe I will," he said. That evening the apartment was quiet. Lily had fallen asleep earlier than usual. The fresh air and the walking and the excitement of meeting Frank had worn her out. She was curled up in her bed with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin before 8 o'clock. Jake had checked on her twice. Now he sat on the living room floor surrounded by the last of Sarah's boxes. Most of them had already been sorted. Lily's clothes and toys had been washed and put away. A few pieces of furniture were in storage. The important papers had been given to the social worker. But this box was different. It was smaller than the others. Brown cardboard with no label. The tape along the top had been pressed down carefully, like someone had sealed it with intention. Jake had been putting off opening it. He wasn't sure why exactly. He just kept moving it to the side and telling himself he would get to it later. Later was now. He pulled the tape loose and folded back the flaps. Inside were keepsakes. Personal things. The kind of things a person keeps, not because they are useful, but because they mean something. There was a small pressed flower between two pieces of wax paper, flattened and dried and still faintly pink. There was a birthday card written in a child's handwriting that must have been Lily's first attempt at letters. There was a folded program from a school play, a library card, a small ceramic bluebird with a chip on one wing. Jake picked up each item carefully. He turned them over in his large hands, the way you handle something fragile, without meaning to. He set each one down in a row. Then, his hand found something at the bottom of the box, a plain, white envelope, and beneath it, a thick, folded piece of cardstock. He set the envelope aside and unfolded the cardstock first. It opened into a series of photographs. Not printed from a phone, but real photographs, the kind you get developed. They had been taped together at the edges to make a long connected strip, like someone had arranged them on purpose. Jake looked at the first one. His throat tightened. It was a photograph taken from a distance. A crowd of people lining a street. Motorcycles rolling past in a long procession. He recognized the road immediately. It was Route 9, just outside of Millhaven. The annual charity ride his club had done every October for the last 12 years. A fundraiser for children's hospital equipment. They had raised over $40,000 at the last one. And standing near the edge of the crowd, half behind a telephone pole, was a woman. She was thin. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. But it was her, Sarah. Jake brought the photograph closer to his face. She was looking directly at the motorcycles passing by. Her expression was not sad. She looked proud. She was smiling the way you smile when you see something that confirms what you already believed. He moved to the next photograph. Same event, different year. He could tell by the banner strung between two poles in the background. The year was printed on it. 7 years ago. Sarah, again. Standing further back this time. She had a coffee cup in her hand. Lily was beside her, maybe 1 year old, sitting in a stroller. Sarah had one hand on the stroller handle, and she was watching the riders pass with that same expression. The same quiet pride. He kept going. 5 photographs total. 5 different years. 5 different events. Not just the charity ride. There was one from a veteran fundraiser breakfast his club had hosted at the fire hall 3 years back. Another from a toy drive they ran at Christmas. She had been there for all of it. She had never once come up and spoken to him. Never called. Never sent a message. But she had been there. Watching. Knowing. Believing. Jake set the photographs down on the floor in front of him and stared at them for a long time without moving. The next morning, Jake told Big Mike about the photographs. He didn't plan to. It just came out over coffee at the clubhouse, the words spilling before he could pull them back. He showed Big Mike the connected strip of photos and watched the big man go quiet in a way he rarely did. Big Mike studied each photograph for a long time. He set them on the table gently. Then he cleared his throat and looked out the window. She knew what kind of men we were, Big Mike said. Yeah, Jake said. She knew. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. They didn't need to. Then, Big Mike slapped both palms on the table and stood up straight. All right, he said. That little girl needs a real bedroom, not a cot and a borrowed blanket. A real one. He looked around the clubhouse at the handful of guys already gathered. Somebody call Ricky. Somebody else call Dez. We're going to Jake's place this afternoon. Nobody argued. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Jake's spare room had 4 bikers crammed inside it. Ricky, who was 29 and knew his way around a paint roller, had shown up with 2 gallons of soft yellow paint and a bag of supplies. Dez had pulled a truck around with a wooden bed frame he had found at a second-hand store that morning, sanded down, and cleaned up and ready to go. Big Mike had brought a twin mattress wrapped in plastic. Spider, who most people only knew as the club's quietest member and best mechanic, had arrived carrying a small bookshelf. He had built himself from scrap wood in his garage. He set it down without saying a word and went straight to work anchoring it to the wall. Jake stood in the doorway, watching all of it, and didn't quite know what to say. Lily stood beside him, wide-eyed. She had her rabbit held tight against her chest. "Is this for me?" she asked. "Yeah, Lilybug," Jake said. "This is for you." She looked up at him with those big, serious eyes. Then she walked into the room and stood in the middle of it, turning slowly, taking everything in. Ricky knelt down in front of her with the paint roller in his hand. "You like yellow?" he asked. Lily thought about it very hard, the way only a 4-year-old can think about a color. "Yellow is happy," she said finally. Ricky grinned. "Yellow it is." Over the following 2 days, the room came together piece by piece. The walls turned a warm and sunny yellow. Spider added a small wooden ledge above the bookshelf and carved her name into the edge of it in careful letters. Dez found a string of small white lights at a hardware store and ran them along the top of the wall so the room glowed softly at night. Big Mike showed up on the second evening with a patchwork quilt his own mother had made years ago, now carefully folded and placed at the foot of her bed. He set it down and smoothed out a wrinkle on the corner. He didn't make a big deal of it, but Jake saw him do it, and he understood what it meant. On the evening the room was finished, Lily stood in the doorway and looked at all of it. The yellow walls, the glowing lights, her name carved above the shelf, the quilt folded just so. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned around and looked at the group of large, rough men standing behind her in the hallway, filling every inch of space, all of them watching her with big, hopeful expressions on their faces like they were waiting to hear if they had done something right. Lily stretched out both arms as wide as they could go. "My uncle's made me a room," she announced to no one in particular. The hallway went completely still. Ricky turned his head toward the wall. Dez pressed his lips together hard. Spider stared at the floor and blinked several times. Big Mike made a sound low in his throat and covered his mouth with one hand. Jake didn't even try to hide it. A few days later, Amanda Reynolds called. Jake was standing in the kitchen, making sandwiches when his phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the screen. He already knew what the call was about before he answered it. "Mr. Dawson," Amanda said. Her voice was professional, but not cold. "I wanted to check in. Things are moving forward on our end. We've identified a few potential long-term placement options for Lily. I thought you should know." Jake set the butter knife down. "Long-term placement," he repeated. "Yes. There are 2 families currently being reviewed. Both have strong records. Good homes." She paused. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I want to keep you informed every step of the way." Jake looked through the kitchen doorway. Lily was in the living room on the floor, carefully arranging her stuffed rabbit and 2 small toy horses into a circle. She was talking to them in a quiet, serious voice, explaining something important that only she and they understood. "How long?" Jake asked. "It could be a few weeks, maybe a little longer. These things take time to finalize." Jake watched Lily pick up the rabbit and hold it up to her face, touching its nose to hers. She giggled at herself. "Okay," he said. His voice came out flat. "Thanks for letting me know." He hung up and stood there for a long moment, with his hand still resting on the phone. A few weeks. He picked the butter knife back up. He finished the sandwiches. He cut them into triangles because Lily had told him on their third day together that triangles tasted better than squares, and he had not cut a sandwich any other way since. He carried both plates to the living room and sat down on the floor beside her. Lily looked up. She spotted the triangles immediately and smiled. "Picnic style," she said happily, and picked up her sandwich with both hands. They ate without talking for a while. The afternoon light came through the front window and laid itself across the floor in long yellow strips. Outside, somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed. Jake watched Lily eat and tried to picture handing her over to someone else. Tried to picture some other house, some other person cutting her sandwiches. He couldn't do it. He didn't want to do it. The realization settled over him slowly, the way cold water rises when you're standing still in it. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just quietly, completely true. He wanted to keep her. After lunch, Lily crawled into his lap without asking, the way she had started doing over the past week or so, as naturally as breathing. She brought the rabbit with her and leaned back against his chest and looked up at the ceiling. "Mr. Jake?" she said. "Yeah." "Is this our house?" He rested one hand on her back. "Yeah," he said. "This is our house." She seemed satisfied with that. She turned the rabbit over in her hands, examining its worn ears. Then, after a quiet moment, she said it. "Dad?" Just that. One small word, spoken the same way she might ask if the sky was blue or if dinner was ready. Simple. Certain. Like it was something she had already decided a while ago and was only just now saying out loud. Jake stopped breathing. Lily tilted her head back and looked up at him. "Can we get more apple juice?" she asked. "We're almost out." He stared down at her. Her expression was completely calm, patient. She was waiting for an answer about the apple juice. "Yeah," Jake said. His voice came out rough. "Yeah, we can get more." She nodded and turned back to her rabbit. Jake sat very still. His chest felt too full, like something large and warm had taken up residence right behind his ribs and was not planning on leaving. One small word. One word that changed everything. He knew, sitting there on that floor with her, leaned against him, that he was going to call Amanda Reynolds back. And this time, he was going to ask a very different kind of question. Jake was up before sunrise. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he had barely touched. The house was quiet. Lily was still asleep. He could hear the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing through the cracked bedroom door. He had not slept much. He kept thinking about that one word. The way she had said it. Easy and sure. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dad." He pushed back from the table, rinsed his cup, and got dressed. At 8 o'clock sharp, he called Amanda Reynolds. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "I want to adopt her," Jake said. No warm-up, no small talk, just the truth, straight and clean. There was a pause on the other end. "I see," Amanda said carefully. "That's a significant decision. I know what it is." Another pause, shorter this time. "Can you come in this morning? There's a lot to go over." "Tell me when." 2 hours later, Jake sat across from Amanda in her office. The room was small and tidy. A potted plant on the windowsill, a stack of folders on the desk, a framed photo of 2 kids in soccer uniforms on the wall behind her. Amanda folded her hands on the desk and looked at him directly. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "The process isn't simple. There will be background checks, home evaluations, a series of interviews. The court will look at your lifestyle, your finances, your living situation." She paused. "Your history." Jake met her eyes. "I know. There may be people who raise concerns. Given your affiliation with the motorcycle club, I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended that won't come up." "Let them raise them," Jake said. I'm not hiding anything. Amanda studied him for a moment. She had seen a lot of people sit in that chair across from her over the years. People who said the right things, but meant something else entirely. People who were fighting for the wrong reasons. Jake Dawson was not one of those people. She could see that clearly. She opened a folder and slid a stack of papers across the desk. "Then let's get started," she said. They spent the next hour going through everything. Forms, timelines, requirements. Jake read carefully. He asked questions when he didn't understand something. He signed where he was told to sign. When they finished, Amanda gathered the papers into a neat stack. "This is a good thing you're doing," she said quietly. Jake looked at her. "I'm not doing it to be good," he said. "I'm doing it because she's mine." Amanda nodded slowly. A small smile crossed her face. "I know," she said. Jake drove straight to the clubhouse. It was mid-morning, and several of the guys were already there. Big Mike was sitting out front, with a coffee mug the size of a small bucket. Diesel was working on his bike in the side lot. 2 others were inside playing cards at the long table. Jake walked in and stood in the middle of the room. "I started the adoption process," he said. The card game stopped. Big Mike appeared in the doorway, still holding his enormous mug. He looked at Jake for a long moment. Then a wide grin spread across his face, big and slow, like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "Well," Big Mike said, "it's about time." What followed was not quiet or dignified. Diesel dropped his wrench on the concrete and let out a whoop that echoed across the lot. The guys at the card table knocked their chairs back and started slapping Jake on the shoulder hard enough to leave marks. Someone produced a bottle from somewhere. Someone else started talking about throwing a party before Jake could even sit down. The whole clubhouse was loud and warm and full of laughter. Jake stood in the middle of it all and let it wash over him. For once in his life, he didn't pull away from it. He just smiled. The weeks that followed were the busiest of Jake's life. There were forms to fill out. More forms than he had ever seen in one place. Amanda sent them in batches, and Jake sat at the kitchen table every evening after Lily went to bed, working through each one with a pen and a cup of coffee. He read every word carefully. He answered every question honestly. He had nothing to hide. He never pretended otherwise. The home evaluation came on a Tuesday morning. A woman named Carol arrived with a clipboard and a pleasant smile. She walked through every room of the house. She checked the smoke detectors. She looked at the locks on the windows. She opened the cabinet under the kitchen sink and wrote something down. Jake followed her quietly and answered her questions in short, direct sentences. She paused in the doorway of Lily's room. The room the club had built together was something to see. The walls were painted a soft yellow. There was a small white bed with a quilt covered in little blue flowers, a bookshelf filled with picture books, and a few stuffed animals. Drawings Lily had made were hung carefully in a neat row along one wall. In the center of the drawings was the very first one, the crayon picture of herself and Jake, slightly crooked, his figure tall and dark, hers small and bright beside him. Carol stood looking at it for a moment. "She drew these herself?" she asked. "Everyone," Jake said. Carol wrote something else on her clipboard. Her smile stayed warm. The interviews came next. Jake sat across from different people in different offices and answered the same questions in different ways. Why did he want to adopt? What could he provide? How did he plan to raise her? What kind of future was he building for her? He never stumbled on a single answer, because he already knew. Between the appointments and the paperwork and the phone calls with Amanda, life at home kept moving forward. Jake and Lily had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Mornings started with breakfast, usually eggs, because that was what Jake knew how to make without burning anything. Lily had taken to calling scrambled eggs yellow food, and somehow the name stuck. After breakfast, came the walk to preschool. Lily held his hand the whole way. She talked nonstop during those walks, about her friends at school, about what cloud shapes she had spotted the day before, about whether rabbits could eat pancakes. Jake answered every question with patience he hadn't known he possessed. In the evenings, they read together. Lily would climb up beside him on the couch, with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, and choose a book from the shelf. She liked the ones with animals. She always wanted 2 stories, never one, and Jake never said no. He had also stopped saying no to goodnight hugs. That had stopped being a decision a long time ago. Big Mike stopped by one afternoon while Lily was at preschool and found Jake at the kitchen table, buried in yet another stack of papers. "You look like a man doing his taxes," Big Mike said, dropping into the chair across from him. "Feels like it," Jake muttered, not looking up. Big Mike watched him for a moment. "She doing all right?" Jake set down his pen. "She's doing great," he said, and he meant it. Big Mike nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug Jake had set in front of him without being asked. "You're doing all right too," he said. "Just so you know." Jake looked at him. Big Mike shrugged one big shoulder. "Just so you know," he said again. The following Saturday morning, Lily sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor with her crayons and a fresh sheet of paper. Jake was doing dishes at the sink. "Dad," she said, not looking up from her drawing. He had been hearing that word for weeks now. It still stopped him every single time. "Yeah," he said. "When I'm adopted, do I get to stay in my yellow room forever?" "Yeah, Lilybug," he said. "You get to stay in your yellow room forever." She nodded, like that settled something very important. She picked up a yellow crayon and pressed it to the paper. "Good," she said, "because I already decided that's where I'm going to keep all my best drawings." The afternoon was quiet. Lily was napping in her yellow room, tucked under her flower quilt with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her cheek. The house was still. Outside, the sky had gone pale and soft, the kind of gray that comes before rain. Jake sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a folder of documents Amanda had dropped off that morning. Progress reports, timelines, next steps. He read through each page slowly, following every line with his finger the way he had taught himself to do when the words started blurring together. Things were moving forward. Amanda had said so herself, and she was not the kind of woman who said things she did not mean. He turned a page and reached for his coffee. That was when someone knocked on the front door. 3 firm knocks, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that meant business. Jake set down his mug and pushed back from the table. He was not expecting anyone. Big Mike usually called ahead. The guys from the club mostly just showed up in a pack and made noise before they ever reached the porch. This was different. He walked to the front door and opened it. The woman standing on his porch was not anyone he had ever seen before. She was tall and slim, somewhere in her early 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat and careful style. She wore a long charcoal coat that fit her perfectly and dark leather gloves that matched. Her posture was straight as a fence post. Her chin was lifted just slightly, the way people hold themselves when they are trying very hard to appear unbothered. But her eyes gave her away. They were sharp and pale and moving quickly, taking in everything around her. The porch, the motorcycle parked in the driveway, Jake himself. She looked at his leather vest, his tattoos, his worn boots, and she did not flinch. But something behind those pale eyes shifted. She had come prepared for exactly what she was looking at. "Mr. Dawson," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. Jake kept one hand on the doorframe. "That's me," he said. She held his gaze without blinking. "My name is Eleanor Bishop." She paused just a beat, as if giving the name time to land. "I am Sarah Carter's mother, which makes me Lily's grandmother." The words moved through Jake like cold water. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that something like this could happen. Amanda had mentioned it early on, in the careful way she mentioned things she hoped would not become problems. Distant relatives, possible complications, people who might appear later once they understood what was happening. He had not let himself think about it too hard. Now he was thinking about it. He looked at this woman on his porch, Eleanor Bishop. She was watching him with that steady, composed expression, but her gloved hands were clasped together in front of her, and she was holding them just a little too tightly. "You'd better come in," Jake said. He stepped back and held the door open. She walked inside without hesitating and stood in the middle of his small living room, looking around with those sharp eyes. She saw the drawings on the refrigerator. She saw the small pair of shoes by the couch. She saw the stuffed rabbit that Lily had left behind when Jake had carried her to bed. Eleanor's expression did not change, but she looked at that rabbit for just a moment longer than everything else. Jake crossed his arms and stood near the hallway. "Lily's sleeping," he said quietly. Eleanor turned to face him. She straightened even further, if that was possible, and she held his gaze with something that looked like determination, and something else he could not quite name. "I did not come here to cause trouble, Mr. Dawson," she said, "but I intend to seek custody of my granddaughter. I believe that is where she belongs." The room was very quiet. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap softly against the window. The rain had picked up by the time Eleanor left. She had not stayed long. She had said what she came to say, handed Jake a small white card with a phone number on it, and walked back to her car with the same straight posture she had arrived with. Jake stood in the doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the street. Then, he went inside and sat down. He stared at the card on the table for a long time. Lily slept through the whole thing. She came padding out of her room an hour later with her hair messed up and her rabbit tucked under one arm, asking if it was almost dinner. Jake made her a grilled cheese sandwich and cut it into triangles the way she liked, and he watched her eat and talk about a dream she had about purple horses, and he smiled at the right times. But his chest felt like something heavy had been set down inside it. After dinner, after the bath, after the 3 bedtime stories and the good night hug and the glass of water she always remembered to ask for right when he thought she was settled, Jake pulled out his phone. He typed one message to Big Mike. "Need the guys tonight. My place." Big Mike's response came in less than a minute. "On our way." They arrived the way they always did, all at once, filling the small living room with leather and boots and the smell of rain. Hector dropped into the armchair by the window. Danny and Coop sat on the floor without being asked. Big Mike took the couch and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes already reading Jake's face. "Talk," Big Mike said. Jake stood near the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. He kept his voice low, because Lily's room was just down the hall. "A woman came by today," he said. "Eleanor Bishop, Sarah's mother." He paused. "Lily's grandmother." The room went still. Hector stopped picking at the arm of the chair. Danny looked up from the floor. Big Mike did not move, but something in his expression sharpened. "She's going for custody," Jake said. Nobody spoke right away. The rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, the house was quiet. Big Mike exhaled slowly through his nose. "She say why now? After all this time?" She didn't explain herself much. Jake shook his head. "She came in, said her piece, and left. Gave me her number like she was handing me a bill." "You call Amanda yet?" Big Mike asked. "First thing tomorrow." Coop shifted on the floor. He was one of the younger guys, broad-shouldered and usually quick with a joke, but there was nothing funny in his face right now. "Can she actually do it? Just show up and take Lily?" "I don't know," Jake said. "That's the part that's killing me." The words came out rougher than he meant them to. He pressed his mouth closed and looked down at the floor for a second. gathering himself. "She's got biology on her side," he said quietly. "I'm a biker, with a record, and a house that's too small. She's got money and a last name that matches." He shook his head. "On paper, she wins easy." Big Mike leaned back and looked at him for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" "I want to fight," Jake said. "But I don't know if fighting is what's best for Lily." The room went quiet again. None of them had an answer for that. And Jake was not sure there was one yet. He rubbed the back of his neck and turned toward the hallway to check that the light under Lily's door was still off. It was. Except it wasn't. There was a thin slice of yellow light at the bottom of the door. And then, very softly, he heard a small voice. "Mr. Jake?" He crossed the hallway in 3 steps and opened the door. Lily stood in the middle of her room in her pajamas, her rabbit hanging from one hand. Her eyes were wide and wet, her bottom lip trembling. "Am I being sent away?" she whispered. Jake arrived at the diner 10 minutes early. He picked a booth near the back, away from the window. He ordered coffee he did not really want and sat with both hands wrapped around the mug, watching the door. Eleanor walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. She wore a gray coat and carried a small purse over one arm. Her silver hair was neat. Her posture was straight. She moved through the diner the way a person moves when they are used to people watching them, calm and measured, like every step was already decided. She spotted him and came over without hesitating. "Mr. Dawson," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Eleanor," he said. A waitress came and filled a mug for her. Eleanor thanked her politely, set her purse beside her on the seat, and folded her hands on the table. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Jake looked at her and tried to find Sarah in her face. There was something around the eyes, maybe. The shape of them. But where Sarah's eyes had been warm and easy, Eleanor's were careful. Guarded, like someone who had learned a long time ago not to let too much show. "I appreciate you meeting me," Eleanor said. "I figured we needed to talk," Jake said, "before lawyers get involved." She gave a small nod. "I agree." Jake leaned forward slightly. He kept his voice even. "I want to understand something. Lily has been with me for weeks now. Before that, Sarah was sick for a long time. Where were you?" Eleanor did not flinch, but something shifted behind her eyes. "That is a fair question," she said. "I'm not asking to be cruel," Jake said. "I'm asking because Lily needs to know the people in her life are going to stay." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her coffee mug, then back up at him. "Sarah and I had a complicated relationship," she said. "There was a great deal of distance between us, for a long time." "Whose choice was that?" She pressed her lips together. "Mine. Mostly mine." Jake watched her face. She was not lying. He could tell that much. But she was being careful, choosing each word like she was picking through broken glass. "Sarah reached out to me," Eleanor continued. "Some years back. She wanted to talk. She wanted things to be different between us." She paused. "I was not ready then." "And now you are," Jake said. "Now that she's gone." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Yes, now that she's gone, and I understand how that looks." "It looks like it's too late," Jake said. "For Sarah, it is." Her voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it, something she was holding down. "But not for Lily. Lily is still here, and she is my daughter's child." Jake sat back and studied her. He was trying to figure out what kind of person he was dealing with. She was not what he expected when she first showed up at his door. The shock of her arrival had made him see her as an enemy. Sitting across from her now, she was harder to read than that. "What happened between you and Sarah?" he asked. "The real reason." Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. Just for a second. "There were circumstances," she said carefully. "Decisions that were made. On both sides. It was not simple." "I'm not asking for simple," Jake said. "I'm asking for honest." She met his eyes. "I know you are." But she did not say more. She looked down at the table between them, and whatever had almost surfaced in her expression pulled back again, like a wave going back out to sea. Jake waited. The diner hummed around them. Someone laughed at the counter. A chair scraped against the tile floor. Eleanor picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. "Some things," she said quietly, "take more time to say out loud." Jake nodded once. He did not push, but he kept watching her face, because he could tell there was a whole lot more sitting behind those words that she was not ready to give him yet. Jake sat in the armchair by the window and pretended to read a magazine. He had not turned a single page in 20 minutes. Across the living room, Lily sat on the rug with Eleanor. Between them was a collection of wooden blocks, the ones Big Mike had painted bright colors the week before. Lily was stacking them carefully, her small tongue poking out the side of her mouth the way it always did when she was concentrating hard. Eleanor watched her with an expression Jake could not quite name. It was not the look of a stranger. That was the thing that surprised him. It was quieter than that, more careful, like someone looking at something precious they were afraid to touch too hard. "This one goes here," Lily said, placing a red block on top of a blue one. She looked up at Eleanor. "You have to be gentle or it falls." "I see that," Eleanor said. Her voice was softer than Jake had heard it before. "You are very careful." "Mommy taught me," Lily said simply. She picked up a yellow block and held it out. "You can put one." Eleanor hesitated for just a moment. Then she took the block from Lily's small hand and set it gently on top of the tower. Lily beamed. "Good job." Something moved across Eleanor's face so fast that Jake almost missed it. A kind of pain that looked like it had been waiting a long time to come out. She pressed it back down. Jake looked at his magazine. The morning moved slowly. Lily showed Eleanor her stuffed rabbit. She told her the rabbit's name was Clover, and that Clover was very brave, but sometimes got scared at night. Eleanor listened to every word like it was important, because to Lily it was. After a while, Lily climbed up onto the couch beside Eleanor and leaned against her arm without asking. Just settled in, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor went very still. Then, slowly, she let her arm relax. She did not pull away. Jake watched that happen and felt something complicated move through his chest. He was not sure what it was yet. Around mid-morning, Lily picked up the ring from where it hung around her neck. She held it up and looked at it the way she sometimes did, quiet and thoughtful. "Grandma," she said. Eleanor looked down at her. "Did you know my mommy tried to come see you?" The room got very quiet. Eleanor's face changed. "What did you say?" "Before she got really sick," Lily said, still turning the ring gently in her fingers. "She drove a long way. She wanted to see you." Lily looked up at her with those wide, honest eyes. "She told me she knocked on the door, but nobody answered." She paused. She said she sat in the car for a long time before she drove home. Eleanor did not move. Lily tilted her head. She wasn't mad, though. She said sometimes people aren't ready yet. She said it in the car on the way back. Lily's voice was soft and certain, the way children are when they are repeating something they memorized without meaning to. She said, "You probably still loved her," just in a way that got stuck. The silence after that was heavy. Jake slowly set the magazine down. Eleanor's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her knees, but it did not help. Her chin dropped toward her chest. Her shoulders, which had been perfectly straight all morning, began to shake. "I did not answer the door," she whispered. The words came out broken and small, nothing like the composed woman who had sat across from Jake in the diner. She came, and I did not answer the door. A sob broke loose from somewhere deep. She pressed one hand over her mouth. Lily reached over and put her small hand on top of Eleanor's arm. "It's okay," Lily said quietly. "Mommy forgave you." And that was the moment Eleanor Bishop came undone completely. The afternoon had gone quiet after Eleanor's tears. She had composed herself eventually. Slowly, carefully, the way a person puts themselves back together when they are not sure all the pieces still fit. She had straightened her back, smoothed her skirt, pressed a folded tissue beneath each eye with precise little movements that looked practiced. But something was different now. The sharpness was gone. She had left Jake's house just after lunch without saying much. A polite goodbye to Lily, a stiff nod toward Jake. Then she walked to her rental car and drove away, and Jake stood on the porch watching until the car disappeared around the corner. Big Mike called that evening. "What happened?" he asked. "A lot," Jake said. "Good a lot or bad a lot?" Jake leaned against the kitchen counter and looked through the doorway at Lily. She was on the living room floor drawing with crayons, humming something low and tuneless to herself. Clover the rabbit was propped against her knee. "I don't know yet," Jake said honestly. Big Mike was quiet for a moment. "Club's ready to back you up. Whatever you need. You know that." "I know. She's going to fight for custody, Jake." "Maybe," Jake said. "That's a yes." "Maybe," Jake said again. He hung up a few minutes later and stood in the kitchen thinking. Outside the window, the sky had gone dark and orange at the edges. The kind of sky that looked like something ending, or something beginning. He could never tell the difference anymore. The honest truth was that Jake had spent the last several hours waiting to feel angry. He wanted to feel angry. Anger was familiar. Anger was something he knew how to carry. It had weight and shape, and it fit inside his chest like it belonged there. He had been ready for a fight from the moment Eleanor Bishop knocked on his door. He had been building for it. But what happened that afternoon had knocked something loose inside him. Eleanor had not answered the door. Sarah had come all that way, sick and afraid and hoping, and Eleanor had been on the other side of that door and had not opened it. Jake knew what that kind of regret felt like. The kind that lives in your bones and never leaves. The kind that still has a voice at 3 in the morning. He was not ready to forgive her. He was not even close. But he understood her in a way he had not expected to. A knock came at the front door. Lily looked up from her drawing. "Is that a friend?" "Stay there a second," Jake said. He opened the door, and Eleanor was standing on the porch. She was still dressed neatly, but her eyes were red around the edges, and she looked like a woman who had spent the last few hours sitting somewhere alone with thoughts she could not outrun. She was holding a small paper bag. "I brought bread," she said. Like that explained everything. Like that explained anything at all. "From the bakery on Connell Street." I was not sure what else to do. Jake looked at her. She looked back at him. And for the first time since she had arrived in town, Eleanor Bishop did not look composed, or certain, or in control. She just looked like someone who was trying. Someone who was scared, and sorry, and showing up anyway, because she did not know what else to do. "Jake," she said softly, "I am not here to fight tonight." Lily appeared at Jake's elbow. She looked up at Eleanor, with bright, uncomplicated eyes. "Did you bring bread?" Lily asked. "I did," Eleanor said. Lily grabbed Jake's hand and tugged it once. "Can she stay for dinner?" Jake stood in the doorway for a long moment. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Lily. Then he stepped back and held the door open a little wider. "You can come in," he said simply. Eleanor looked at him for just a moment, like she was making sure he meant it. Then she stepped inside. The weeks that followed were not perfect. Nothing about it was neat or easy or simple. Eleanor did not magically become a warm grandmother overnight. Jake did not suddenly become a patient, polished father. There were awkward silences at the dinner table. There were moments when Eleanor said something too formal, and Lily tilted her head sideways like a confused puppy. There were evenings when Jake and Eleanor sat in the same room and ran out of things to say, and the quiet between them got thick and heavy. But Lily never seemed to notice any of that. She moved between them, like water. Easy and natural and without any walls. She showed Eleanor her crayon drawings and explained each one with great seriousness. She asked Eleanor to read bedtime stories and then corrected her when she read too fast. She grabbed Eleanor's hand in the grocery store without being asked and swung it back and forth while she walked. Eleanor did not know what to do with that at first. Jake watched it happen from a distance. He watched Eleanor's stiff posture slowly soften. He watched the careful, guarded way she held herself begin to loosen. Little by little, the way ice melts when the sun finally comes out. Not all at once, just gradually, quietly. One afternoon, he came home from a club errand and found Eleanor and Lily sitting at the kitchen table together. Lily was showing her how to draw a horse. Eleanor was holding a green crayon and listening with complete attention. Her reading glasses perched on her nose, her silver hair falling slightly loose from its usual neat arrangement. Jake stood in the doorway and did not say anything for a long moment. Eleanor looked up and caught him watching. Something passed between them. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but something close to understanding. Something that said they were both here, both trying, both doing it for the same little girl. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Eleanor hired a local attorney but never filed the custody papers. She told Jake one morning over coffee that she had decided not to pursue it. She said the words simply and without drama, looking down at her cup instead of at him. "She belongs with you," Eleanor said quietly. "Sarah knew that, and I think I knew it too. I just needed some time to accept it." Jake nodded once. He did not say much. He did not need to. What he did do was ask her to be a reference for the adoption, to speak to the social worker about Lily's well-being, to be part of the process in whatever way she could. Eleanor had looked up from her coffee cup then. Her eyes were shining. "Yes," she said. "Just that. Just yes." The courthouse was packed. Every single member of the club was there. Every last one of them wearing a suit. Some of the suits clearly had not seen the light of day in years. Big Mike's jacket was a size too small across the shoulders. One of the younger guys had his tie backwards. Another had clearly watched a how-to video online and still gotten the knot wrong. Nobody cared. Lily walked in, wearing a white dress and her white shoes, and she was carrying Clover tucked under one arm. The ring hung around her neck on its chain. She held Jake's hand on one side and Eleanor's hand on the other, and she walked down that courthouse hallway like she had been waiting for this day her whole life. Maybe she had. The judge was a quiet man with kind eyes and reading glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He looked up at the room full of leather-vested bikers in ill-fitting suits, and he did not try to hide his smile. "In my 30 years on the bench," he said, "I do not believe I have ever seen a larger support system for one little girl." Lily beamed up at him from across the big wooden desk. "Those are my uncles," she told him helpfully. Someone in the back of the room laughed. Then everyone was laughing. And just like that, it was done. Lily Carter officially became Lily Dawson. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.